Hello again. This lecture I'd like to talk about reference types and how they are different from value types. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this add method since I've made my point with that. I want to leave this btn test here. Let's go back. I'll add in another button to start talking about value types. So I'm going to add a button here. Just have this form have a lot of random buttons on it. Let's have this be called ref types. Ref types. Let's double click it so I have another method that I can start working with to do some stuff. Let's put a comment here that says reference types. Okay, so there's a lot shorter list of reference types than value types. Here's all the value types. Again, you don't need to really remember them, so don't worry about that or memorize them per se. Reference types, there's a much shorter list. The first reference type, by shorter list, there's two. So the first reference type is a string. So what is a string? Strings are something we work with all the time. We can say string s equals string.empty. And all that's saying is it's just an empty string. We could also do the same thing like this. Both bits of code are essentially the same thing. So it's just setting up an empty string of nothing, essentially. You can also have tu. So a string is just an array of characters, as you can see. So a single character, we talked about up here, all a string is multiple characters strung together, if you will, for a lack of better terms. So the second reference type is an object. So what do I mean when I say object? Well, if I go back to this window, remember all of these are objects. So these are also reference types. So btn exit is an object or a reference type that usually has a lot of properties, and the properties could consist of other objects, could consist of other value types, other reference types. So that's why an object is a reference type, and that's why a string is also a reference type, because a string is essentially an array of characters, which are value types. So what do I mean when I say reference types and value types? Well, it all has to do with how things get passed to methods. So, for example, if I pass an integer to a method, or a double or decimal, these value types, what it's actually passing is the value of that type. So if I pass int I, int j to my addition method, it's actually passing 4,000 and 3,000. Well, then what the heck is it passing when it passes a string or an object to a method? Like here, object sender. Well, what it's actually passing is a reference to that object. It's not actually passing the entire object here in the method call. It's saying, hey, here's a pointer or a reference to where this object is located if you need to get anything off of it. And why is that important? That's important because whenever you send something to a method that's an object, it doesn't actually change that object if you were to change it. And that is because it's not, the object isn't passed unless you return that object. Then obviously it'll change it because you're returning it. So, for example, let's have a method. We have button one click. What kind of object can I make? Can I make a new button here? Let's make a new button. And I think if I make a new button, I can pass it a name. Maybe not. So here I'm newing up a button. I'm going to say, give my button a name. So all this method's going to do is give my button a name, and I'll pass it the button. So let's use the IDE to help me out a little bit here and generate my method for me. And it's going to send it a button, and I'm going to say b.name equals my new button. Okay, so now let's go here, and I want to show a message box, and I want to show b.name. So I'm going to new up a new instance or a new object of a button. I'm going to give it a name here in this method, but it doesn't return anything. It returns void. Okay? So what you should be thinking is I'm going to send this button here. It's going to set the name. And now when I show the name, it should show my new button. Now at the same time, let's do int I equals 4 or 3. Let's add 1 to I. I'm going to send it I. Okay, so now it has I. And I'm going to say I plus plus. Okay, so let's have another message box. Dot show I dot toString. So messagebox.show takes a string. So I need to convert this integer to a string in order for it to be displayed. So now I have a button, B. I'm going to give the button a name. I'm going to show the button's name back in this method here. I have an integer 3. I'm going to add 1 to it. And I want to then show the new value of that integer. So let's see what happens there. Think about what you would expect, and then we'll talk about what the results are that we see. Button one click, I think it's ref types. Actually, let me practice what I preach and set a breakpoint. And I'll step through our code here. So let me set a breakpoint here. All you have to do is just click over here on this little gray bar on the left hand side. And that's telling the IDE when you start stepping through this code, when you go over this code to show your value, stop and let me inspect what's going on. So now when I click ref types, it should go through this button one click event, start instantiating my objects, my strings, and it should stop here. So string U equals hello world. And you have a lot of options at the top of the screen. What do you want to do next? Well, the next thing I want to do is step over this, or you can see that F10 is the shortcut for that. So I want to hit F10. It's going to go to my button. It's making my new button, so I'm going to F10 over that. And now what's next? Let me try to make this a little bit larger. Okay. So give my button a name B. So it's going to send that to my method, and if you want to step into a method, you can hit F11 and it'll go into your method. So notice that my cursor is down here now. I'm going to step over. It's going to give my new button a name. I'm going to F10 over that, and notice I'm back here again. I'll step over that the rest of the way, and now it should show a message box with the name of that button. So let's see what it gives us. So now look, it says my new button. So it gave my new button a name, and it showed it here. So I'll click OK. And now it goes on to my next statement. I make a new integer. I'll step over that. It shows my integer's value is 3. I want to then add one to my integer. So let's step into that method and make sure it does it. I'll step over. I should add one to it. Step back. F10. Now what do we expect in this message box? And we have 3. So why isn't it 4? I have 3. I sent it to the method. It added one to it. So why isn't it 4? And that comes in the difference between a reference type and a value type. So let's look at the difference here. We have a button. We sent the button to the method, but the method never returned it. So why did this get set and not the other one? Well, it's because this was a reference to that button. We said, if you need to alter this button, it's located here. And I altered it, I was done, and I showed it. Here, it's a value type. I sent the value to the method of 3. I added one to 3, but I didn't do anything with it. The value was 3. I added one to it. The value is still 3 here, but it's 4 here. So if you ever want to actually save what's going on for a value type, you actually need to return your value type. So you can say I equals add 1 to I, 3, and then it should add 1 to 3, and now it should show 4. So let's comment out this message box.show. And when I click ref types, 3, return I plus plus. Maybe I need to return plus plus I. Okay. So notice there's a difference between I plus plus and plus plus I. So this increments the value and then returns it. 1 returns it and then increments the value. So there's a little bit of a difference between I plus plus and plus plus I. But notice that if you want to persist the value of your value type, you need to return it. But if you want to persist the value of your reference type, all it needs is just a reference to that type. So hopefully the difference between value types and reference types makes us a little bit more sense. In the next video, we'll start covering strings and being able to convert from one type to another.